In other news, the Presidency says Operation Vulindlela is still on track to help the economy achieve 3.5% growth by 2029, despite domestic and economic headwinds. The Presidency's Rudi, alongside National Treasury, gave a progress report on the second quarter of the second phase of Operation Vulindlela. That was at the JSE. And Newzroom Afrika's business reporter, Ntokozo Khumalo, is live to us with the latest on that story. And Ntokozo, just to be clear, good morning. 3.5% will be an improvement, but it isn't ideal.
Well, Michelle, good afternoon. Of course, that 3.5% is what most economists say the country needs to be able to make a real dent on unemployment, considering that we're hovering at about 1%. That additional 2.5% growth would be welcome, but much more growth needed, really. And I suppose that is one of the aims of Operation Vulindlela, to fix those structural issues within the economy, particularly in the energy, water sector, attract that investment again and build that confidence. And I am with the co-head, Rudi. Thank you once again, as always, for talking to us, Rudi. So you said we are on track to achieve that 3.5% growth. We are in the second quarter of phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela. And now perhaps to satisfy Michelle, help us understand why you are feeling optimistic that we are on track for that 3% growth from the reforms that we see.
Second quarter of the first year of the 5 year of the administration, so that's important. I'm fairly optimistic because I think there are many of the reforms. Let's look at energy and potentially what we're trying to do in creating a competitive generation market. The reforms that we have done, for instance, have unlocked a significant amount of new investment by private sector. The data that we show here done by, for example, the Eskom and the private sector on potential projects, renewable energy projects, takes us to potentially 220 gigawatts of additional generation capacity. What we've got to do is ensure that those projects do come online, that we do get financial close, that we do get grid access, and that they eventually build that. Similarly, in the logistics space, more recently, we've, of course, the minister has announced the 11 train operating companies that have gotten slot sales. They have to invest in rolling stock. They want to ensure that the network is up to standard. They want to add an additional 20 million tons onto the network. That's important. Water is similarly as well. Our visa reforms have been, revolutionary as well. Local government and the two other new reforms are, important. But I am certainly confident that we've got to aim for that. We've got to aim for the 3.5% and more. We've got to work. The reforms is just about one of many of the strategies that we've got to implement. But it is the most key. It's what brings confidence. It's what brings private sector investment and eventually, infrastructure investment, growth and inclusiveness in the way that we're trying to build on the reform program.
Now, if we compare some of the updates that we got from Operation Vulindlela and the updates we're seeing from phase 2 of the initiative, the first phase would have a lot of red and a lot of orange in some of the reforms that we're tracking. Slightly different picture this time. We're seeing a lot of the reforms being on track. Very few red, very few orange. Could you talk us through then where we are with the second phase and looking in this period particularly?
Absolutely. The orange and mostly orange, I think, in the first phase. And largely that orange were in some of the reforms that we continue to do in the second phase, which is logistics, energy and water, for instance. A lot of it is on track, but albeit you would have noticed that there were two reforms that are slightly off track, and they relate, for example, to the unbundling in Transnet and the unbundling in Eskom. They're quite complex. And as we said, it's not about the commitment. It's about ensuring that we do it right, that we do unbundle properly. There are financial considerations. There's issues in relation to how it operates. There's issues in relation to how we can set up a market space, getting regulators on board and all those kind of things. I think we're confident that much of the reforms, given the momentum that we created since phase 1, will continue. And of course, we'll be frank and open and honest about whether we're moving faster or slower, and we'll give reasons why we're moving slower. But I think this is the difference, that phase 1 created this momentum for phase 2, where everyone in a government of national unity, everyone in the reform implementing departments have mobilized the resources, have mobilized the entities and institutions, and we're moving towards successfully implementing phase 2 in this term of office.
And I suppose data from Stats SA also did show that light at the end of the tunnel. Yesterday, they released that capital expenditure by the public sector and really saying, showing how that investment in infrastructure, new construction works is really coming out and showing. You said 2026 is a big year where we really will start to see, some of that fruit coming off. Talk us about that.
Absolutely, and again, like I said to you, I think we'll see some significant investment in energy. We've got to resolve grid access issues and ensure that people can connect to the grid as quickly as possible. As we said, NERSA has taken that responsibility of setting out rules and will be publishing that fairly soon. So the rules are clear, transparent, open. And they allow for private sector to be able to access this. I'm excited about the logistics space, and partly because we've now announced for the first time slot sales, third-party operators on the network. As I say, once you sign these contracts with 11 train operating companies, what they want is, of course, to be able to get their train sets on a line as quickly as possible. And so those investments have to take place, And then, of course, the big announcements that will happen following the request for information on the 3 corridors. Of course, that momentum continues. We've got to get to the market phase, which is the request for proposals. And that, I think, is quite important and will create a lot of interest. So I'm fairly optimistic. I think we've got to drive that. We've got to continue our partnership. We've got to move towards high levels of inclusive growth. As you say, infrastructure is the key driver here.
Yeah.
If we don't get our investment as a percentage of GDP up, right, we won't see that growth. That's what's going to drive real growth. That's what's going to drive job creation. That's what's going to drive for us to be able to see the sort of changes that we're looking for. And all of us are working towards that. And that's why this reform program to unlock that investment, both for the public sector and for the private sector, is fundamental.
Absolutely. And before I let you go, Rudi, the importance then or next steps for other 2 reforms that are important to average South Africans as well, the water and spatial planning. Talk us through what the next steps in that regard are.
Absolutely. For water, it's going to be quite critical. It's about ensuring that we reform bulk water, but also water at the distribution level. You'll see that the Metro Trading Services reform around improving service delivery, about ring fencing, about ensuring that we invest capital and maintenance in water for distributors is quite important. Changes in the Water Services Act, for example, of ensuring that we have greater regulatory oversight on water services providers and water services authorities. Those are going to be important steps that are going to be critical for us to ensure that we maintain the level of quality, but also that we keep the level of spend, infrastructure and maintenance. That's what's failing. Spatial is quite important. And again, it's shifting from a supply-side model where we simply build RDP houses, and most of this has been done on the periphery of economic activity or on the periphery of where we recreate. What we've got to do is simply shift it around, develop a demand-side model where we can attract investments within city centers, within places closer to work, where property prices are quite costly, but with a demand-side model and a subsidy model, we think that can certainly change, for example, levels of densification, and then when densification is critical.
Yeah.
But also that we're able to address fundamentally the spatial dynamics and spatial patterns. Ultimately, what you want is people to be closer to their places of work and closer to shopping. We've got to change and ensure that that does happen. So that is an important focus, including local government, which is about basic services, getting back to delivering basic services to citizens at the end of the day.
Rudi, as always, thank you so much. Michelle, as you heard there, the reforms, not so many reds, a lot of orange, but largely on track in still achieving that 3.5% growth by 2029. As Rudi said, a lot more work still has to be done, but, Operation Vulindlela is starting to bear some fruit in terms of making a dent in getting the economy growing again, Michelle.